Hello everyone, my name is Shola Bulu. I'm the principal consultant of Shola Bulu and Associates. We are a strategy and communications training and consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations achieve their objectives through strategic communications, organizational effectiveness, and reputation management. So I'm doing this, by the way, compliment of the season, depending on when you're watching this. This is like our Christmas special edition videos. I'm going to be doing this countdown to Christmas Day because I'm Christmas of Christmas. So anyways, the first video I was talking about how to ace an interview, how to prepare for an interview to be a corporate communications manager, and particularly with big conglomerates. The second one, I'm now going to be talking about what it takes to be a chief communications officer. And the reason why I did these videos is because, like I mentioned in my last video, I've been getting a lot of requests from people asking to do interview preps, and I've had to be doing them individually, which, and sometimes it works, it doesn't quite work timing wise, but I felt this is something I haven't really talked about, like specifically on this channel. So how about I do a videos that talk about how to prepare for different types of roles and what you can expect, and then people can have that as sort of a prep. So I've done one at the communications manager level, which is like head managerial level, like middle management or almost like senior manager level actually. And then this one is now at C-suite level, which is like the chief communications officer. And then I will do another one at sort of like the working level, hopefully before Christmas. So I have one other video left after I do this. But at first I was thinking, why am I prioritizing the senior roles and not starting with the junior? But then I didn't realize that it's actually better to start off this way because I think many of us, when we're working at working level, because we don't even know what the big picture thinking is like, we really don't understand how what we're doing at the working level fits into the big picture. So that connects, there's a disconnect between what we do and what the organization expects. But I think it does help, when you see what your leaders are doing. Like there was a practice we had in my former place of work where, the leaders share their scorecard and then they share it down and then the rest of us build our scorecards based on that. And now I understand why, people do that. Efficient organizations do that because you need to understand what success looks like for your organization, your business, and your business leaders, your organizational leaders, before you then know what success looks like for you. Because if you cannot situate your own work in what the business and the organizational leaders are working towards, what they consider to be priority, then you know that there's a problem. And honestly, this happens a lot. End of the year, I mean, by the time feedback comes, you get to know how connected or disconnected your work is with what's actually happening in the wider organization. So anyways, there you go. So let me just share my screen while I run through a couple of things. Again, I'm supposed to do these videos in like 15, 20 minutes, but it always runs a little bit more. But anyway, let's see how we. So yes, like I said, so what it takes to be a chief communications officer. And by the way, we know that this title, chief communications officer, is usually given in organizations where there is a big organization. You can't be a one-man business and you have a CCO job. That that doesn't happen. So and it's a relatively new role. Before now we didn't have that title, didn't exist. We've had CFOs for a very long time. We've had I don't know which other chiefs have we had. We've had some other chiefs, depending on, but it's the chief communications officer role. I think it's almost like about 2 or 3 years old. It's quite old. And I mean, it's quite young. And I think it's a very good development. I mean, we've always had chief executive CEOs we've had for like forever. CFOs too, we've had for a very long time. In some organizations, maybe chief medical director, that kind of thing. But chief communications officer is new. It's like, I don't think it's up to 5 years old. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's definitely not up to 7 years old. It's quite new. And what I would say is that for those of us, people coming up in your professions, please watch out for what the most senior role in the organization that you're working in is, because that tells you how important communications is or is not in that organization. Now, this is not a bad thing. It's just for you to be aware. So if an organization, the most senior job, regardless of how big they are or how whatever, of course, again, like I said, chief communications officer, this context is for large organizations. So if you're in a small, firm, like the kind of firm you're working for, this doesn't apply. I mean, like my kind of firm, for instance, which is also like a small consulting firm, this doesn't apply. I mean, if you're working in a big company that has several layers of leaders and operations and hundreds of staff and that kind of thing, please, and you are working in the communications field there, you are either a communications officer level, advisor, manager level, whatever. Please take note of what the most senior role is if the most senior communications professional or leader is not a C-suite executive, that tells you something about the priority that the organization gives to communications, which, like I said, is not a bad thing because businesses make their choices as to who is at C-suite level based on their business model, operating model. There are very good reasons for that. But I'm saying just be aware. Now, in some organizations, you may have external affairs or public affairs. If they're bundling communications up with many things that don't really fit, that again tells you a lot. It's either it just says something about where they place communications. I don't want to make a value judgment because, again, I trust that business leaders and boards are doing what is right for them. But I'm saying just be aware, be aware. Now, any organization that has this job title, Chief Communications Officer, that is an organization that gives the same preeminence to communications as they give to finance, as they give to other chief executive jobs. Okay, so another one, COO. So there was the common ones are CEO, CFO, and Chief Operating Officer. So those were the standard three for many years. COO has been existing almost as long as CEO because CEO cannot do the operation. So if you find an organization that elevates the Chief Communications Officer to the level of this Chief Communications Officer to the level of this Chief Operating Officer, wow, that's something that's noteworthy. So let's get right into it. And I'll be keen to hear your questions and comments, as you watch this. So, what I've done here is I've just done a list of things that I think, this is my opinion, based on what I've seen. A lot of what I share is my lived experience. It's not really things that I've seen somewhere else. It's just what I've seen. So, I mean, it's not all encompassing, but then experience does count for something. But this is my sense of what it takes to be a chief communications officer and what you should expect if you are vying to occupy such a role at some point in your career or you're currently in the role. The first thing, obviously, is to be a chief communications officer, you have C-suite accountability. What that means that you are at that level of the organized business where you are a C-suite member, you're a member of the leadership team, so you're not somebody that can be complaining about why things like this. You really have the ability to make things happen. What that also means is that you may sometimes have to do things that other people should be doing. I mean, there are certain meetings you may be called on to chair on behalf of the COO or even the CFO or the CEO if either of them is around. So you are a C-suite member and you really need to behave like one. I mean, just like we see sometimes CFOs attending meetings on behalf of the CEO, even external conferences and things, even though they may not be financially related and that kind of thing. But that's what C-suite accountability does. It means you may be called upon to show up in business conversations that ordinarily somebody else would go for. So you must be able to have that kind of presence and command that gravitas that makes people know that if that happens, then people recognize that there's a very valid reason for you being there. Again, I say this with caution because if it's a very technical conversation, they're not likely to put you there. But then it's also possible that you have established yourself in such a way that even you can attend such conversation, have a technical expert on, go along with you. But then you have that gravitas that they'll even be glad to have you. They'll be like, oh yeah, yeah, if COO can come, send this person because they've seen that you're someone that can play in that space. So you're a business leader. That's the point. You're no longer just a functional leader, a communications leader. You are a business leader who is a specialist in communications. Do you understand? As opposed to, something else. So fine. So business leadership is very important. You have to understand the business that you're working for. Once you become chief anything, you are no longer just a communications professional. You're not allowed to just sit in your functional excellence and not care what's going on in the business and to be speaking as a stranger or an outsider to the business. So whatever it is that you need to do to make sure you understand a whole lot more about how the business works, how it creates value, how value is eroded, what the value drivers are, how it makes money, all the numbers, operations, whatever you need to do, go on road shows, attend, spend time in the field, whatever it is, you must be a business leader primarily. Because until you understand that business, you cannot help that business to to achieve its goals through communication, because that's what really everybody does. The finance person understands the business and then comes up with the best financial or commercial solutions to help them deliver on the business. The same thing with the supply chain manager, leader or chief or whoever, what they call them. I think they call them chief. I'm not really sure, chief supply chain or something officer, when where such positions exist. But whoever is leading that in the contracting and procurement, they have to understand the business first before then they know the best contracting strategy to advise. If you don't understand the business, you're likely to come up with a contracting strategy that will make the business lose money or not to be able to achieve its objectives. So business leadership, very important at the C-suite level, regardless of the role that you're doing. So when you get into those meetings, they're expecting you to speak as a business person. You come with your external perspective and communications mindset, but the business understanding needs to be clear. So business leadership, business knowledge, very important. Now, you must have agenda setting capabilities with key stakeholders. This is very key. It's more key in this role than it is in other roles. So for the CFO needs to have agenda setting capabilities with, like maybe the regulatory bodies, industry, commercial bodies, investors, lenders, and that kind of thing. But for you, it's a broad range of undisclosed stakeholders. You have to be able to be in that position where you can help to set an agenda for all of them, because there's no restriction to the kind of stakeholders you may have to do this for, depending on the issues at stake. So if, for instance, let's say there's a merger and acquisition that is going on, somebody's managing that relationship, perhaps the CFO on the commercial level, but you have to stay close enough to the conversation on the relationship management and communication risk management level, so that when the CFO is going into those conversations, whatever risks, exposures, may occur in that space in terms of disclosures, in terms of protecting so many things, the chief communications officer is already safeguarding those risks and making sure that the CFO does not unwittingly do something or say something or, fall into some complexity that may help the effort. So that advisory, that hand-holding, that oversight from a communications and stakeholder management perspective must always be there. So, and I'll go to the other side of it because I'm just doing the left side first of all. Now, chief communications officer, you need to have very strong external networks within the industry, within media, government, and related sectors. And I say this because a lot of us communications professionals at the working level and sometimes at the managerial level are introverts. So if you still and I tell people you have to deal with that introvert mindset very early, because that is the one thing that will stand between your ability to function as a business leader or anybody with C-suite accountability at any stage in your career. So even if you're in an organization, everybody knows you're really good at what you do, you can do strategy, communications, media, and all of that. If they do not feel or sense at some point that you're able to build, nurture, grow, maintain, develop, leverage on strong external networks within the industry that you're working in, with the media sections of the media, government, and any other related sector. No one is going to offer you the chief communications officer. They're very likely, and if there's no one else in-house that can do it, they may even end up bringing somebody from another function, which is like the greatest. Oh my goodness, that's horrible, Or they will end up recruiting externally, and I won't be able to. I won't blame them, because that's having strong external networks is critical in that role. In fact, I would even add to that security agencies, depending on the sector that you're in. So there's certain people that there's some sectors you must be in. The chief of defense staff, chief of naval staff. Do you understand? Those people speed dial. You call them, they pick up your phone. So you must be the kind of person that can play at that level. Otherwise, honestly, there's no need for chief to be on you can't hold down that role. So at the level of the chief communications officer, technical expertise in terms of functional expertise in terms of the communications professional function is important, but even more so is your ability to navigate external complexity on behalf of the business and the organization. The bigger the business is, the more risk in terms of money, value, the higher that role has to be. So I'm just saying all of this so that we know the difference between the levels. And if you haven't watched the last video I did, part of this Christmas series about the communications manager role, please watch that, because you'll see that what I'm saying here is completely different, from that level. Again, it also depends on, the way you're working, but the chief communications officer, that is a very big title, and it's given because the responsibilities are significant. So you must also be internally respected and influential within the organization. This is very key. One of my recent reflections about the fact that communications people have to be internally effective first before they are externally effective. I've come to see that many of us think that our work starts and ends with what we do with the external audience, not realizing that you first have to earn the trust inside the organization, either from your team members, from the business, sometimes from your CEO, before you can even have the space to do anything outside. Your job as a communications professional or leader or even chief, whatever, starts with earning that trust. So if you, that's the first word. If you take up a new role, that's the first thing. Don't, that's the first thing. That is the first thing. If you've already, if you come in and you have that trust from the onset, then that's fine. But if you don't have it, that becomes your key mandate. That's what you have to do because you will be hindered in terms of what you can do when people do not respect you and you're not influential within the organization. You can't make things happen. People don't trust your judgment. People don't like, people have to venture to, people have to know that people have to, that level you get to where people are like, oh, I cannot go without, I can't do this without consulting this person. You have to be that kind of person. The kind of trust that the lawyers have, the kind of trust that the finance people have. I mean, nobody's going to do an event without involving finance because at the end of the day, you run into trouble and you'll be able to pay your vendors or whatever. That's how it should be for comms. People shouldn't, the organization, the CEO, the CFO, your colleagues on the C-suite should be afraid of carrying on certain conversations without bringing you in. It shouldn't be you having to always say, oh, why wasn't I brought into this? How come I didn't know the business of planning this merger and acquisition? How come I don't know that we're changing this product line? They should be afraid, as in they should know that it's in their interest to have a conversation with you early on. So if that is not happening, there's just something to watch out for there. Because the chief communications officer, any organization that creates that role needs it. So there's a problem if that need is not being actualized. There's a problem. I can't say more than that. There's a problem because it's not very few organizations actually have this role. In fact, how I know was that I did a Google, a LinkedIn search, and you can try that yourself. Just type in chief communications officer and check. Very few names will come up. Very few people in our profession are holding this title at this point. Most people are like head, leaders, managers, even directors. But this is still quite a new title. But I like it because I think the organizations that are given this title are saying, it's a message that you're sending across. Communications has become even more influential, impactful, and decisive in terms of the outcomes that we need to have. And we are elevating it to the level of the business operations. That for me, in fact, I think I will open a separate book for the communication, for the organizations that I note that have this title, because it says a lot about them intrinsically. And again, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I'm saying from a communications professional perspective, I would personally even like to interrogate more into why some organizations have chosen to go this route and why some haven't. Because there must be some data, there must be some reasons behind it, because it's a strategic choice. Because once you call somebody a chief, then you have to put the person at the C-suite, level. You can't exclude them from certain conversations. But as long as you're still living your highest, your most senior comms person at the level of manager, head, you can get away with a lot of things. Director too, you have to involve them in certain conversations. So yeah, so that's an aside, but let me not go overflog that. So you have also to be able to network and influence at a high level, national and international level. I made that point already at the national level, but international as well. So that shouldn't be. So this is not a job for an introvert. You know what? Even if you're an introvert, you must be an extroverted introvert, because there's a lot of having to really like have and really you have to be the one to insert yourself into conversations, not wait to be invited, and put in the hard work to nurture, and also knowing who you should be speaking to, when, why, how, building the relationships ahead of time for when you need them, and yeah, it's just so key. It's just so key. So it's not just taking on this role, but it's really about the expectation. I think any organization that would have a chief communications officer role, there must be a high expectation for that role. So to even you first off the bat, you have to find out what the expectation is and meet it and exceed, because um yeah, I think this is one role that they wouldn't want to keep on if it's not delivering the value that it was meant for. For the others, CFO and COO, you really cannot run as a big conglomerate without having those roles. And also, I guess for chief communications officer, I guess. But then, the point is, if they have many businesses have survived for years, not having it at the C-suite level. So I still think that it's still so new that it will take time for us to really see how things will go going forward. I think the value that the current people holding the title give to the organization will help others to then realize that, okay, they need to raise the level. But like, even in my part of the world in Nigeria, you can see that that's a long way coming, because I'm still seeing organizations who should have communications managers not having communications managers, and they're having, communications advisors or officers at a much lower level reporting into, managers from other functions. So it's really a long way to go. So kudos to those organizations who actually, see things differently and perhaps in a position to do things differently as well. So again, if you're a chief communications officer, you are a board level advisor. It's important to know that you're advising the board. So the ability to speak in the language of the board is very important. I mean, so I would expect that a chief communications officer, you've done some board training, you understand how to communicate with the board, what the guardrails are, and sort of language that people at the board expect, and the brevity of context and all of that. So you really need to get some training in that if you haven't gotten that, and some experience probably on another board apart from your company board, I think would also help you. So, and these are things you can actually prepare, you can start doing on your own now if you are positioning for a future role as chief communications officer. Then you must be the kind of person you have the ability to bring structure, professionalism, and discipline to the function. You're a leader. You are a leader of leaders. A chief communications officer has several levels of people reporting to them. They're likely to have senior managers, supervisors, heads of teams, team leads, before you get to the officer level and below that. So you must be able to bring structure, professionalism, and discipline, and set up a well-oiled machinery that can function, on its own, running on its own steam, understanding what is right to do, what is not right to do. You must be able to be the one to shape that. In fact, many organizations, I would imagine, who would nominate a chief communications officer role are looking for somebody to do that for them. You know what I mean? So it's something that you have to be able to do. If you are lucky that, okay, you took on the job and somebody else already done the heavy lifting for you, fine. Then all you're doing is maintenance. But if you get into the role and that structure, that professionalism, that discipline is not there, then it's your job to do it. Don't throw it down to your managers. As the chief, you have to be the one to do that work. And it doesn't mean you're going to get down and be micromanaging. It just means set up create the opportunity, apportion resources, put people in roles, get people trained, provide the budget for it, and maintain oversight. I think a chief communications officer should be a hardcore comms person. I don't really think people from other functions can do this work well, because the level of expertise that is required is not just a leadership role, because if it's just leadership, the same way as the CFO has to be finance and a numbers guy, I think chief communications officer, you have to be a discipline lead. So I think you also need to be, so number 4, you need to be able to create a team that delivers as required to standard at every time. So well-oiled machine. In fact, any chief communications officer that doesn't have an efficient team, you are a waste of space. You have no, do you understand? As in, why? Why would any organization spend that money on elevating a communications officer role to C-suite level, and you cannot deliver the best world-class communications team or structure or operating organ anyone has ever seen? I mean, really, I don't get it, because and this is me, because all my working life, I have worked in organizations where the most senior comms person was probably, well, at the Nigerian level would be me as the communications manager. At the global level would be VPs and things like that. But in country Nigeria, I think the highest we ever got was a GM at some point, which was definitely not, I don't think it was this, no. Or maybe, yeah, although he had a lot of respect and all of that. But yeah, so yeah, anyway, it was a little bit tricky. It was a multinational, so it's a little bit tricky in that regard. So a lot of us, like in my role then as communications manager, I was doing a lot of influencing without authority. And I talked a lot about that in the last video. So if you haven't seen that and you're in that kind of context now, please go and have a look at that. So for me, I'm really excited that there's now this whole opportunity about chief communications officer, and that there are jobs and places where this title is built. I had left the workplace before this became a thing, and I'm now running my own firm as a independent consultant. So number 5, chief communications officer should understand how strategic communications and stakeholder management works on a fundamental level, and you can bring that knowledge to bear to create space and support for the business. I'm going to move a bit faster now. So it's also important for a chief communications officer to understand the depth, breadth, and spectrum of 21st century communications. I say this because I see a lot of people appointing people who are traditional PR people into chief communications officer. Chief communications officer is not chief PR officer. And there's a big difference. We have videos on this channel talking about the difference between public relations and communication. And this is something I always have to keep reiterating. Almost every session I hold, I always start off with the difference between PR and communication. It's completely different. So, and if you're a PR person, the public relations does not teach us how to manage, how to battle fake news, how to battle misinformation. That is firmly in the communication space. And I see that a lot of when this can be problematic, and I've had this experience where I've had people who are traditional media specialists trying to resolve fake news, misinformation on social media. They don't get it. They don't get it. They take a press statement approach to it. It doesn't solve any problem. It doesn't solve it. So I think a chief communications officer, if you're a chief communications officer, let's put those three together: chief communications officer, chief officer, chief communications, chief officer, chief communications officer. If you are really worthy of that title, then you need to understand how 21st century communications works, where people can be sitting in certain countries in the world and actively affecting how people think in your own country. So this is not something you have to understand how Facebook, how certain platforms, how would I say, amplify certain messages, and how you can combat that. You need to understand audiences, demographics, narrative, sentiments, online, and the analytics, and how to manage that space depending on the kind of organization you're working for. If you're working for government, you need to understand this. If you're working in institutions, you need to understand this. If you're working with businesses with high exposure, you need to understand this. Which leads me to number 7, which is very important. The ability to identify, manage, and mitigate communications risk. Again, this is another thing that I continue to see everywhere that a lot of people just don't have blind sight of. There's something called communications risk. In fact, I look forward to the day when we will actually have jobs called communications risk manager, because I am beginning to think that, because I see a lot of people, they don't even, and this within our profession too, they don't realize that there's something called communications risk. Therefore, they do not mitigate it. They do not manage it well. They don't even identify it where it exists. So for every event or whatever it is, or initiative or strategy, I would expect a chief communications officer to be able to identify what a potential risk is. The legal people do it. For every contract, the supply chain management people do it. The financial people do it. The commercial managers do it. For every deal, they are constantly watching out for what is the commercial risk. The same thing with the chief operating officer, constantly looking for where are the operational risks, where are the safety risks, where are the environmental risks. That's their job. So their job is to put in place systems and processes and hire resources to help us manage the risk around the operations. How can you be a chief and you are not even looking for risk? So people are not even aware that there's something called communications risk. They think you can just go out and say anything. So identifying, first of all, managing and mitigating communications risk is the role of the chief communications officer, and put in place systems and structures. What I do a lot of the time, I think this helps me when in terms of understanding what my role should be in any job, is I just look at what the other functions are doing, and there are many to compare for. I either look at the business, what are the producing or the operating arms doing, or I look at the functions, what's commercial doing, how does finance support in this space, how does legal support in this space, how does HR support in this space. HR too, when they're employing staff, they are also mitigating resourcing risk. That's why they do all the entire interviews, the background checks, and all of that, to make sure that we do not unwittingly employ people who are a risk to the organization, either through their activities in the past or the laws they violated. Like in Nigeria, you cannot hire somebody who hasn't completed the youth service. So so if you don't have a plan in place for identifying potential recruitment risks, why are you a chief human resources officer or whatever? So yes, that's really a thing there. And again, like I said, this is my list. I didn't get this from anywhere. This is based on my own lived experience, what I've observed, and what I'm observing as I go along. So again, chief communications officer, you should be able to manage stakeholder complexity and issues effectively and advise the board, the C-suite on issues and crisis management strategy. You should be somebody that is able to create and protect value. Now, I want to make this point here, because communications people are always wondering about how do you create value and we always think of value. I've heard people say, oh, you cannot quantify the impact of communication. I'm like, really? Okay. So let me hide my left my hand column on that. But if you cannot quantify the impact of what you're doing, then why are you doing it? How do you expect somebody to pay for it? How? I mean, I run my own firm. If you're doing marketing for me and you're telling me you can't quantify the impact of my marketing, then I really shouldn't be funding that marketing. So you had better find a way. Maybe we need to have a conversation about what does success look like? What part of this can we measure? What's my bottom line? What does success look like to me? We need to have a conversation. And I think many of us in communications don't think about having that upfront conversation with the business where you're engaging in terms of what does success look like and what do I have to do to achieve it and what is realistic for communications to be held accountable for in this value chain. So for instance, communications, the way I see how you quantify communications in business value terms, even if it's NGO, humanitarian development or government, is how does communications help you to create new value or protect the value that has already been created? So sometimes, for instance, if, for instance, a community was threatening to shut down a particular operation and the team got involved and we were able to engage with them and prevent the shutdown, we have protected value. So whatever operations that we were able to prevent from being shut down, the value of the production that was preserved for that day is the quantity of what our engagement has achieved. Now, it may be that we were not 100%, many of us, an integrated team worked on that. But yes, what that means that we can still say that our efforts, either in terms of the media strategy or the messaging for the engagement, contributed. So the reporting about the success of that engagement strategy cannot be made without involving us because we played a role either with the messaging or the engagement strategy or the media management strategy. That is how you quantify value. It's not necessarily always cut and dried as, oh, I produced this number of units or things or provided these services, but it's really about how you helped the organization to continue to function and which business activities you can say, based on your intervention, were either helped to progress or certain negative actions were held back. And again, if you're a chief communications officer, you should be able to quantify this because all your other colleagues, by the way, are quantifying it very well. So yeah. So custodian of brand and reputation management strategy, absolutely. So even though the CEO is sort of like the custodian of the brand, but then the chief communications officer is now the person that helps that CEO to really, really actualize whatever the vision of the brand is. And you should be that person that the CEO trusts, relies on to ensure that the brand, the reputation of the company, the institute, the organization, the institution is protected, it is preserved, it is amplified, it is enhanced, and it is there. It is a currency that is growing, that is being invested on, and is available for the company to spend and leverage on when it needs it. So, and any attack, any threat to the reputation or to the brand is promptly identified, mitigation strategy put in place, you're on top of it. And you're advising, and then you're helping the organization to learn from whatever it is that happened and change and reform and be better. So it's expert knowledge, expert capability, expert delivery at a very senior level, board agenda setting. So you're not even if you're a chief communications officer and you are reactive, there's a problem. You should be the one initiating. That's what I mean by agenda setting capabilities on communications and stakeholder management. So number 11 here drives the brand application, amplification, positioning, and marketing strategy with tangible results. I can't overstress the importance of a chief communications officer because, like I said, any organization that has gone this route, which by the way, many have not, is looking for something extra. They're looking for something that cannot be delivered at communications manager level. They're looking for something that cannot be delivered at communications supervisor, communications head. They need something that can only be delivered at C-suite level. The expectations are high. They are really high. So amplification of the brand, the positioning, there should be no question about all of this. Tangible results. And the results should be tied to the business. Of course, at chief communications officer level, you can't be talking about impressions and engagement. You can't be talking about the fact that we opened 3 channels or we've held 4 events. What you should be telling us is that the permits that we needed, the approvals that we needed from government, after we had the engagements with them, that worked. The media, the negative media coverage around something that happened, died down by the time we interviewed, that we called the reporters, that we had engagements with them. Change management strategy, we moved from, we acquired a new business investment, we managed internal communications around it, there were no issues, seamless transition, transformation, supported the transformation and change management project. We came up with a change communications agenda and strategy, which is best in class, will be replicable and transferable and meet all our operations. When we're doing it in other parts of the world, this is what we would, that's the kind of thinking a chief communications officer does. You're not talking engagements and impressions, please. I mean, it's fine. So the last thing here is ability to measure results in tangible terms. We should be talking about costs. We should be talking about cost savings. We should be talking about investments that we've been able to attract based on how we've engaged with stakeholders, the kind of messaging, the media strategy, the support we gave to the new business entry team, the crises and the incidents that we averted, the value of opportunities created through proactive engagement of stakeholders. So, that's really what it's all about. So, what it takes. And I think, I hope this has been useful for you, but I think it's also been really insightful for me just thinking through this as well. And I really like your comments in terms of, some of these things I've said. Does this make sense to you? Does it resonate to you? If you're a chief communications officer, I'd like to hear from you. If you're someone working in an organization where you have a chief communications officer and you see how he or she works, do you see, how does any of this, does this resonate with you? And in terms of how you're working now, do you think that you're taking the right steps to prepare you in future for this kind of role? Because to be honest, whether or not you eventually get to take a chief communications officer role, I think if you're someone that you have a passion for communications, you should hope to be able to function at this level at some point. For someone like me, I have never held a chief communications officer role, but I have been at a managerial or at a senior level advising C-suite leaders, and even up till today, I advise C-suite leaders. So it is helpful for me to understand how the expectation for the chief communications officer, because I am now in the position where I provide expert advice to them, as an external consultant. So thanks very much for watching. And if you haven't joined you're not subscribing currently, please subscribe, subscribe, click the subscribe button and hit the bell notification, and watch out for our next video. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in advance. Stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you.